Okay, so sorry, I apologize. I'm taking my video in my bedroom today because there's a lot of stuff going on in my kitchen. So I'm just apologizing for the ambiance, I guess. Um, so I guess we're just talking about how the functional behavioral assessment in relation to like my interview with the SLP and how this whole process went as far as conducting a functional behavioral assessment on an autism student. And to me, this experience was somewhat eye opening. So, when I first spoke to the speech language pathologist, she suggested this particular student that I observed because she wanted more information on collecting data about, his tantrums and if he was actually advocating for himself like he was supposed to be, and tracking information for his goal. And so when we were hypothesizing, she stated that she felt like the paras were probably doing more for him and, saying that they were doing more for him while he, like, instead of him advocating for himself. And while I did see that behavior, like while I was observing, it was still really interesting because I went in with this hypothesis. Oh, okay, so he's not advocating for himself, and thinking that we were, like if I was in that situation, I would end up using some kind of communication cards to help him, learn more self advocacy techniques, and at the end of the whole process, my whole conclusion entirely and perspective entirely changed on how best to help the student. Uh, so, like I said, this student was doing these really big tantrums. So when I interviewed the para who works closely with the student, she stated that he actually had a tantrum that lasted from 9 o'clock in the morning until the end of the school day, until about 2:30 in the afternoon. Um, and she said that the tantrums, are happening. They don't happen every day, but they are happening and they're intense when they do happen. And one of my observations, he was actually coming down from a tantrum that had lasted about 20 minutes. Um, so anyway, but during the whole observation process, I was able to see that, he was able to advocate for himself, even though it was really limited. So ways he advocated for himself was he would make a noise, like he would go, and look toward an aid. Other ways he would actually physically walk up to them and push on them. Um, he also is starting to use words. So I interviewed, he was able to use the word walk. He was able to use the word more. He was able to use water, so he is advocating for himself. However, I did notice that, like, he was, how do I say this? So, so while he was advocating for himself, I did notice that the aides were doing a lot of stuff for him, but it wasn't happening like all the time. So at lunch, he was able to advocate more for himself, or he was advocating more for himself. Like he would eat his food, he would pick up his lunch. He had this routine developed, of course, so it was probably easier for him to navigate, but he was able to make a sound to get some attention because he wanted more food. And so, the pair was able to get him more food. And then, but during like the class time setting, he, hang on, you have to wait. But during the class time setting, he was not advocating for himself at all. Like, not even picking up a pencil, not picking up a pencil or a piece of paper, even though those things were provided to him. So, anyway, my whole conclusion came that, and it turns out that after sifting through all the data, the tantrums are happening not during lunch, in those unstructured periods of free time, but they were happening during this classroom setting where he was expected to sit and, participate in academic activities. So, through the analyzation of the data, I actually came to the conclusion, which is almost opposite of my original conclusion, that the student is actually trying to avoid being in the classroom setting. For it could be a sensory reason, or it could just be because he just doesn't want to do the tasks. Maybe he needs to move. Um, anyway, so I thought that the biggest things, uh, the biggest eye-opening thing was that you come in with this hypothesis of why the student is acting that way, but after analyzing the data and the antecedent and the behavior and the consequences, um, and just dynamically what's going on, um, you're able to come to a much different conclusion, and possibly even better able to help that student. Um, so as far as how I will apply this in the future, with other individuals on the spectrum, I think it's going to be most helpful and to not make conclusions about the behavior until you actually sit down and try to analyze the behavior, or somebody, if I reach out to a psych or somebody, like, not to make conclusions until we actually have more information and have actually sifted and analyzed the behavior in a way such as a functional behavioral assessment. Um, so anyway, my biggest takeaways was this was a very positive experience, and I am actually excited to see what happens again, like when I do this in the future. All right, that's it.